Okay, so let's unpack this. You've sent over some really interesting stuff for us to look at today.
Yeah, looking forward to digging in.
We're doing our deep dive, and the topic today is all about creativity inspiration. Specifically, drawing from this framework in the material, we're calling it Redefine Imaginify, just for our chat today.
Right. And the mission here, I think, is to really get into what this framework actually says. What it suggests sparks imagination, gets the creative thinking going.
Uh-huh.
We're focusing just on the points presented in your sources, cutting through any other noise.
Yeah, and what struck me about this material is it's not just like a checklist. It feels more like a whole system almost for understanding how different inputs fuel creativity. Makes you look beyond the usual places you might think of.
Absolutely. So, okay, diving into this Redefine Imaginify stuff. Where does it start? It looks like environments, experiences.
Right.
They're pretty key, right? But maybe not how we normally think.
Exactly. That's what jumped out. The sources really emphasize it's not just about being somewhere, beautiful or obviously stimulating. It's more about places that kind of disrupt your normal routine or give you new sensory stuff in unexpected ways.
And what's really fascinating, the framework actually points specifically to liminal spaces.
Liminal spaces. You mean like hallways
Right.
or waiting rooms, that sort of thing.
Precisely, yeah, like airport lounges, bus stations, maybe hotel lobbies, those kind of in-between zones, places where you're moving through but not really there yet. The source suggests these spots are like surprisingly potent for sparking ideas.
That feels, counterintuitive. I mean, most people find those places kind of boring, maybe a bit stressful even.
I know, right?
Why would the source say they're good for creativity?
Well, the argument laid out is that because you're sort of temporarily disconnected from your usual tasks and responsibilities in these places,
Okay.
your mind gets a bit of permission to just, wander, to break in the normal mental flow.
Right. I see.
And that break, that disruption, can apparently open up pathways for new connections, things you wouldn't normally think of when you're stuck in your everyday patterns.
So the takeaway from this angle is it's less about having that perfect, dedicated, creative room or whatever, and maybe more about intentionally breaking your routine, putting yourself in these sorts of transitional places sometimes.
That's a really good way to phrase it, yeah. The disruption seems to be the key thing it's pointing to.
Okay. Now, what about something more traditional, like nature? We always hear about nature and inspiration. Does this framework touch on that?
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
But it connects nature to inspiration through a pretty specific idea it talks about, called effortless attention.
Effortless attention. Okay, like that feeling when you're just sort of watching waves or clouds.
Exactly, or just, looking into trees, the leaves moving. Your attention is engaged, but it doesn't feel like hard work or concentration.
Right. It's soft, kind of.
Yeah, a soft focus. And according to this source material, that specific state, that relaxed kind of engagement, it actually helps reduce mental fatigue.
Okay.
It seems to free up cognitive resources, making your mind more receptive, more open to imagination, to new ideas kind of bubbling up.
So you've got these two environmental things then. On one hand, the sort of deliberate disruption from these liminal spaces, jarring you out of your normal flow. And on the other hand, you have this kind of relaxed openness that nature encourages through effortless attention.
Exactly. And both in this framework are framed as these sort of external environmental triggers that influence your internal mental state.
Key external trigger. Okay, got it. What else does this Redefine Imaginify material see as like crucial fuel for creativity?
Well, another big piece seems to focus on the stuff you take in from other creative works, like books, films, art, that kind of thing.
Right. But again, it feels like the framework isn't just saying go consume stuff. It brings up this really interesting term, narrative cross-pollination.
Narrative cross-pollination. Okay, sounds a bit dense.
Yeah.
But reading the source, my understanding is it means deliberately mixing ideas or styles from sources that are really, really different from each other.
Exactly that, yeah. Instead of just staying in your lane, like reading only sci-fi or only looking at Renaissance art, the framework seems to push you to actively seek out things that don't normally sit together, things that are disparate.
Can you maybe give an example of what would that look like in practice, according to the source?
Sure. Let's say you read a really dense history book, something super factual,
Okay.
and then right after you go look at some totally abstract, maybe messy expressionist paintings.
Right. Different worlds.
Totally. And then maybe you follow that up by listening to some, I don't know, really experimental, maybe dissonant jazz music.
Ah, okay. I see. So it's about forcing your brain to kind of switch gears dramatically.
Yeah.
To wrestle with completely different ways of structuring things, different aesthetics, different messages.
Precisely. And the argument presented is that this clash, this kind of friction between these diverse inputs, that's what sparks new connections. Insights that just wouldn't happen if you stayed swimming in the same creative pool all the time.
So the core idea here then is that creativity isn't just sparked by, like, passively admiring great work.
Right.
But by actively using it. Like, it's raw material you can mix and match and transform.
That's exactly how it comes across. It frames creativity less like some magical bolt from the blue.
Yeah.
And more like a process of synthesis and transformation. And that process needs really rich, varied inputs to actually work well.
That definitely changes how you might think about, say, watching a movie or going to a gallery.
Totally.
It's not just downtime. It can be seen as, like, active research for your own creative mind.
Yeah, like this framework is basically telling you to become a very deliberate curator of what you feed your brain.
A curator of inputs. I like that. And then combining that with being intentional about the environments you put yourself in and the mental states those places tend to foster. You know, whether it's that disruptive energy of a liminal space or the sort of quiet openness you get from nature.
Right. That combination, the curated environment and the curated input, that seems to be where this Redefine Imaginify idea really locates the spark, the trigger for new ideas.
Yeah.
It makes inspiration feel less mystical and more like something that results from, well, intentional actions, environmental choices, and deliberate mental processing.
So, okay, pulling back a bit.
Yeah.
This whole deep dive into your source material, this Redefine Imaginify framework, it offers a really specific viewpoint, doesn't it?
It really does.
Inspiration isn't just luck or random chance. It's tied to specific things you can do, specific places you can be.
Right. It's sparked by particular kinds of environments, these liminal spaces, or nature tapping into that effortless attention thing.
Oh.
And also through this active narrative cross-pollination, using books, movies, art in a very intentional, almost deliberately jarring way sometimes.
Yeah. And thinking about this whole framework presented in your sources,
Yeah.
it does leave us, and you, the listener, with a pretty interesting question to chew on, I think.
It absolutely does. If creativity, seen through this lens, is so heavily shaped by these specific external factors,
Yeah.
you know, the disruptive places, the effortless attention, the deliberate mixing of different works, does that mean creativity is mostly about just finding the right triggers out there in the world around us?
Or is the real core work actually internal? Is it more about building up our own internal capacity, our own discipline maybe, to actively go out and find those things,
Right.
choose them deliberately, and then have the mental muscle to synthesize all those external inputs within ourselves? Where does this framework suggest that balance really lies?
Yeah, exactly. Leaving you with that thought to mull over, is it more about the external trigger or building the internal capacity to use those triggers? Where does the Redefine Imaginify framework ultimately point regarding the real seat of creative power?